Hey guys, tonight we're drifting across the largest feature on our planet, the Pacific Ocean, where ancient navigators read the sea itself like a living map. You're standing on a speck of sand and coral, maybe somewhere in the Marshall Islands, and the nearest land is 1,000 miles away in every direction. The year is roughly 1200 C, and you've got no compass, no sextant, no GPS, just your body, your senses, and the endless blue stretching to every horizon. Here's the thing, you probably won't survive this journey without understanding how to read the ocean's secret language, because one wrong turn means drifting into the void until your fresh water runs out. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel while you're settling in for the night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the warm sand between your toes as you wade into the shallows, and already the ocean is speaking to you in a language your ancestors have been decoding for 3,000 years. The Pacific isn't just big, it's incomprehensibly vast, covering more area than all the land on Earth combined. Imagine trying to find a 10-mile-wide island in something that spans 11,000 miles from Asia to the Americas. It's like searching for a specific grain of sand on a beach that wraps around the entire planet. Yet somehow, your people have been doing exactly that for millennia, spreading across this liquid continent to populate every habitable speck of land from Hawaii to Easter Island to New Zealand. The mainstream historical fact that still boggles modern minds is that Polynesians reached virtually every Pacific island centuries before Europeans even knew the Pacific existed. But here's the quirky tidbit your history teacher probably skipped. These ancient navigators could detect islands from over 30 miles away, not by seeing them, but by feeling how the islands disturbed the ocean's rhythm. Historians still argue whether this seemingly supernatural ability was pure skill or involved some kind of heightened sensory evolution, like how some people today can smell rain coming from miles away. You're about to learn that the ocean isn't uniform or featureless. It's textured with information, patterned with highways and signposts that most people can't perceive. The water moving beneath your feet right now has traveled thousands of miles, and it carries stories about every piece of land it's encountered along the way. The first time you truly understand what wave patterns mean, you're lying flat in an outrigger canoe with your elderly teacher, feeling the ocean's pulse through the wooden hull. She places your hand on the side of the boat and tells you to close your eyes. "Feel that?" she whispers as a subtle rhythm thrums through the wood, boom, 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 boom. That's not random ocean movement. That's the signature of an island 20 miles to the northeast, invisible beyond the horizon, announcing its presence through the water itself. You learn that waves aren't just moving water, they're energy traveling through water, and when that energy hits an island, magical things happen. The waves wrap around the landmass like water flowing around a rock in a stream, creating interference patterns that extend far out to sea. Where waves that have bent around opposite sides of an island meet again, they create a distinctive crosshatch pattern. It's like the island is constantly broadcasting its location in a language written in water, and you're learning to read it. Your teacher shows you how different islands create different signatures. A tall volcanic island like Tahiti creates one pattern, while a low coral atoll creates another. The waves reflect off the underwater slopes, refract around the edges, and interfere with each other in predictable ways. She makes you lie in the canoe for hours, feeling these patterns through your spine, your ribs even, and this always makes visiting anthropologists blush when they document it later, through your testicles, which apparently are surprisingly sensitive to subtle pressure changes. Hey, when you're navigating thousands of miles of open ocean, you use every sensor your body's got. The mainstream fact that oceanographers have confirmed is that these wave patterns are real and measurable. Satellites can now detect the same interference patterns that ancient navigators felt with their bodies. But here's the weird part. Modern instruments show that experienced traditional navigators can detect wave pattern changes that are so subtle, they barely register on sensitive equipment. It's like they've trained their bodies to become living wave detection instruments. Historians still argue whether this ability is purely learned or if Pacific populations developed heightened sensitivity through natural selection. After all, families whose navigators could read waves better would have been more likely to survive ocean voyages and pass on their genes. Some researchers have even suggested that the constant gentle rocking of island life from infancy might prime the inner ear for detecting these subtle patterns, like how kids who grow up around music often develop perfect pitch. You spend weeks learning to distinguish between different types of swells. There's the deep, steady rhythm of swells that have traveled across thousands of miles of open ocean. These are your baseline, your reference point. Then there are the confused, choppy patterns where swells from different storms intersect. And finally, there are those subtle, almost musical variations that whisper of land beyond the horizon. Your teacher tells you that master navigators can identify specific islands by their wave signatures alone, like recognizing someone's voice in a crowded room. Your education takes an unexpected turn when your teacher leads you into her hut and pulls out what looks like a child's craft project gone wrong, a chaotic lattice of palm fronds and sticks tied together with coconut fiber. This is a stick chart, and despite its humble appearance, it's one of the most sophisticated navigation tools ever created by human beings. You run your fingers along the bent sticks, and she explains that each curve represents how ocean swells bend around specific islands. The small shells tied at intersections mark the islands themselves, while the pattern of sticks radiating outward shows the wave shadows and interference patterns. You quickly realize these aren't maps in any conventional sense. They don't show distances or directions the way European charts would. Instead, they're more like sheet music for the ocean, abstract representations of wave behaviors that navigators memorize and internalize. Your teacher has you close your eyes and trace the patterns with your fingers, over and over, until the shapes burn themselves into your muscle memory. The chart stays here, she says firmly. What travels is the knowledge in your mind and the feeling in your bones. The construction of these charts is itself an art form. Master navigators spend months observing wave patterns around their islands, then translate those observations into these three-dimensional models. Some charts show the wave patterns around a single island, while others, the ones that make your head spin, display the interconnected patterns between entire island chains. The most complex ones look like spider webs designed by a mathematician on strong kava, with curved sticks showing how swells from the northeast trade winds interact with swells from southern storms around dozens of islands simultaneously. Here's the mainstream historical fact. When European explorers first encountered these charts in the Marshall Islands, they couldn't make heads or tails of them. They assumed they were primitive art or religious objects. It wasn't until the 1960s that Western scientists finally understood what they were looking at: sophisticated wave maps that encoded oceanographic data in a completely non-Western way. The quirky tidbit? Each navigator's stick chart was slightly different, personalized to their own understanding and experience, like how jazz musicians might write the same song differently. Some navigators even made charts that only they could read, incorporating personal mnemonics and secret knowledge. Historians still argue whether stick charts were independently invented in the Marshall Islands or if the technology spread from elsewhere in the Pacific. The Marshallese tradition is the most well-documented, but similar concepts appear in various forms across Polynesia and Micronesia. What's certain is that these charts represent one of humanity's most elegant solutions to visualizing invisible phenomena. They're essentially data visualizations created centuries before anyone coined that term. You practice with increasingly complex charts, learning to correlate the bent sticks with the actual feeling of being on the water. Your teacher takes you out in the canoe to specific locations where multiple wave patterns intersect, then has you compare what you feel with what the chart predicted. It's like learning to read by constantly checking the words against reality. Sometimes you get it wrong and she laughs, not unkindly, reminding you that even master navigators occasionally misread the patterns. The ocean is honest, she says, but it doesn't repeat itself for students who aren't paying attention. The most intimate moment of your navigation training arrives on a calm morning when your teacher instructs you to strip down and lie naked in the bottom of the canoe. This isn't some bizarre hazing ritual. It's the final examination that separates competent navigators from true masters. You stretch out on your back, feeling slightly ridiculous as she paddles you out beyond the reef. Then she ships the paddle and lets the canoe drift. "Now," she says simply, "tell me where we are." You close your eyes and let your entire body become a sensing instrument. The canoe rocks gently, and through your spine, you feel the deep, primary swell coming from the northeast, the trade wind swell that's been blowing steady for thousands of miles. But there's something else, a secondary rhythm that pulses through your lower back every 12 seconds or so. You shift slightly and yes, there it is, that subtle cross pattern pressing up through your hips. And through your testicles. There's no delicate way to put this. You detect an even fainter vibration, a kind of thrumming that shouldn't be there in open water. Southwest, you breathe, barely daring to speak louder in case you lose the sensation. There's an island southwest. Maybe 15 miles. Your teacher grunts approvingly. You've just detected the wave shadow of an atoll that's completely invisible from your position, using nothing but the sensitivity of your reproductive organs. If that sounds absurd, consider that these organs evolved to be exquisitely sensitive to pressure and vibration for obvious reproductive reasons. Ancient navigators simply repurposed this sensitivity for wayfinding. The mainstream scientific fact is that the human body contains multiple pressure-sensitive systems. The inner ear for balance, the skin for touch, and yes, the genitals for, well, originally for reproduction, but apparently also for navigation if you're creative enough. Modern researchers have put accelerometers on traditional navigators and confirmed they can detect ocean swells with amplitudes of less than 2 inches, waves so subtle that untrained observers can't even see them. But here's the bizarre detail that makes anthropologists scratch their heads. Female navigators, though rarer historically due to cultural restrictions, often developed different techniques. They would sometimes navigate by sitting upright and feeling wave patterns through their lower abdomen and pelvis, essentially using their entire pelvic bowl as a sensing organ. Some reports suggest pregnant navigators could be especially sensitive, though historians still argue whether this was physiological reality or cultural mythology. Your training intensifies as you learn to distinguish between different types of wave interactions. There's the simple reflection pattern when swells bounce off an island and head back out to sea. There's the refraction pattern where waves bend around an island and change direction. And then there's the complex interference pattern where reflected and refracted waves meet and create standing waves, zones of confused water that would terrify most sailors but which navigators read like street signs. You discover that your body position matters enormously. Lying on your back gives you one type of information, lying on your stomach another. Some navigators prefer to stand with their legs spread wide, feeling the deck's movement through their feet and up their legs. Others sit cross-legged and rock with the boat, turning themselves into human pendulums. Your teacher encourages you to find your own style, your own way of communing with the ocean's messages. The real magic happens when you learn to detect islands you can't see, islands that might as well be invisible, islands that announce themselves only through the ghost patterns they create in the water. You're sailing with a master navigator now, heading into empty ocean where the next landfall is 3 days away. She suddenly orders the sail lowered and gestures for you to feel the water. At first, you sense nothing unusual, just the regular trade wind swells and a few wind waves on top. Then, gradually, like tuning into a distant radio station, you begin to feel it. A zone of confused water where the swells seem to stumble over themselves. That's the shadow, she explains, and you realize you're feeling the wave shadow of an island that's still 30 miles away. The island is blocking swells from one direction while allowing others to pass, creating a detectable zone of calmer water extending far out to sea. It's like the island is casting a shadow made of wave patterns instead of light. You could sail for hours in the wrong direction and never see this island, but by reading its shadow, you can home in on it like following a beacon. You learn that different islands cast different types of shadows. A long, thin island creates a sharp shadow with distinct edges where the wave patterns change abruptly. A round island creates a fuzzy shadow that gradually fades into the surrounding swell patterns. Atolls, those rings of coral around a central lagoon, create the most complex shadows of all, with waves refracting through the passages between islands and interfering with each other in predictable ways. The mainstream historical fact is that this wave shadow navigation allowed Pacific Islanders to expand their target size dramatically. Instead of needing to spot a 10-mile-wide island, they could detect its 100-mile-wide wave shadow. But here's the mind-bending part. Experienced navigators could even detect the shadows of island chains, reading how multiple islands disrupted the swell patterns to create navigation corridors between archipelagos. They were essentially using the entire ocean as a giant detection grid. Historians still argue whether navigators could really detect islands from as far away as traditional stories claim. Some accounts describe navigators sensing land from 50 or even 100 miles away, which seems to push the limits of what's physically possible. Yet modern wave models show that under perfect conditions, steady swells, minimal wind waves, and an experienced navigator, these detection distances might actually be achievable. The ocean's surface contains far more information than most people realize. It just takes a lifetime of training to learn to read it. Your most surreal experience comes when navigating at night. Without visual distractions, your other senses sharpen dramatically. You lie in the canoe under a blanket of stars, feeling the ocean's rhythms through the wooden hull. In the darkness, the wave patterns seem to intensify, becoming almost musical. You can feel the deep bass note of the primary swell, the higher harmonics of wind waves, and threading through it all, those subtle variations that whisper of land beyond the horizon. Sometimes you practice with your eyes closed during the day, learning to trust your body's sensations over your vision. Your teacher deliberately takes you through confused seas where wind waves obscure the underlying swells, forcing you to dig deeper into your sensing abilities. The eyes lie, she says. They see only the surface chaos. The body feels the deep truth. You're learning to navigate not just by reading the ocean, but by becoming part of it, letting its rhythms flow through you until you can't tell where your senses end and the sea begins. Above you, the stars wheel in their eternal patterns, and you're about to discover how Polynesian navigators wove together two completely different navigation systems, the wave patterns below and the star compass above, into one seamless wayfinding technique. Your new teacher is a white-haired woman who seems ancient but moves with surprising grace. She wakes you at 3 in the morning and leads you to a special teaching platform built on the beach, oriented precisely to the cardinal directions. Sit, she commands, and begins naming the houses of the stars. Not constellations in the Western sense, but rising and setting points on the horizon where specific stars appear and disappear. The Hawaiians call it the star compass, dividing the horizon into 32 houses, each named for the stars that rise and set there throughout the year. You memorize them through chants and hand movements, your fingers tracing the paths of stars across the sky while your voice repeats the ancient names. Ina Ko'olau, where the Pleiades rise, Malanai, where the Southern Cross sets low on the horizon. But here's where it gets interesting. You're not just learning star positions, you're learning to correlate them with wave patterns. When Arcturus rises in the house of Manu, the trade wind swells usually come from that same direction. When the star Sirius sets in a particular house, storm swells often arrive from the opposite bearing within a few days. The stars and swells are dancing partners, each one's movement reflecting and predicting the other's behavior. The mainstream fact that amazes modern astronomers is that Polynesian navigators memorized the rising and setting positions of over 200 stars, using them to maintain course across thousands of miles of open ocean. But the quirky detail your teacher shares is that navigators also used what she calls star pairs, stars that rise or set at the same time but in different parts of the sky. By keeping one star on your left and its pair on your right, you could maintain a steady course without constantly watching a single star. Historians still argue whether the star compass was standardized across the Pacific or if each island group developed its own version. The evidence suggests both. There was clearly communication and knowledge exchange between island navigators, but each archipelago also adapted the system to its local conditions. Hawaiian navigators had different names and slightly different houses than Tahitian navigators, who differed from those in the Marshalls, yet they could still communicate and share knowledge when they met. Your training becomes a 24-hour experience. During the day, you read wave patterns. At night, you study stars. And in the magical hours of dawn and dusk, you learn to use both together. Your teacher shows you how to check your wave reading against star positions, using one system to verify the other. If the waves suggest you're approaching an island from the northeast but the stars say you're heading southeast, something's wrong. Either you're misreading the waves, or there's an unusual current pushing you off course. The most profound moment comes when you realize the star compass isn't just about navigation, it's about timing. Certain stars only appear at specific times of year, so by noting which stars are visible, you also know what month it is. This matters because wave patterns change seasonally. The winter swells come from different directions than summer swells. Storm patterns shift. Even the reliable trade winds weaken or strengthen depending on the time of year. By reading the stars, you're not just finding direction, you're locating yourself in time as well as space, understanding which wave patterns to expect and which to treat as anomalies. Your apprenticeship takes an unexpected turn when you're brought to a shallow tide pool where a group of children, none older than 7, are lying on their bellies in the warm water. They're giggling and splashing, but there's method to their play. Each child has a small wooden boat, no bigger than their hand, and they're learning to feel how water moves around objects. This is where navigation training really begins, not on the terrifying open ocean, but in these safe, controlled pools where mistakes mean getting splashed, not lost forever. You watch a 5-year-old girl place her toy canoe in the pool and then put her cheek against the water's surface, eyes closed in concentration. She's feeling how the tide flowing in and out creates miniature currents around the rocks, how waves no bigger than ripples reflect off the pool's edges. Her grandmother sits nearby, occasionally calling out questions. Which way is the water pulling? Where does it swirl? Can you feel the warm spot where the sun heats the shallow part? The children graduate to larger pools, then to protected lagoons, then to the reef passages, slowly building their wave-sensing abilities in environments that match their courage and skill. By the time they're teenagers, they've spent thousands of hours with their bodies in water, developing an intuitive understanding of fluid dynamics that no textbook could provide. You realize your own training is following an accelerated version of this same progression. What these kids absorb over a decade, you're trying to learn in months. The mainstream educational fact is that Polynesian cultures developed one of the world's most sophisticated apprenticeship systems, starting training so young that wave reading became as natural as walking. But here's the charming detail. They made it fun. Navigation training was embedded in games, stories, and competitions. Children would race their toy boats through obstacle courses, learning to read microcurrents. They'd play a form of blind man's bluff in the water, finding hidden objects using only wave patterns. Historians still argue whether this early training created actual physiological changes in the navigators' sensory systems or just exceptional skill development. Some researchers have noted that lifelong navigators have unusually well-developed inner ear structures, possibly from a lifetime of processing subtle motion. Others point out that children who grow up on boats and in water develop different postural reflexes than land-dwelling kids. They're literally wired differently for balance and motion detection. You join the children for some of their exercises, feeling slightly foolish as you lie in 6 inches of water trying to detect which direction a tiny current is flowing. But the humiliation fades as you realize how much harder this is than it looks. The kids are sensing things you can't even detect yet. One boy, maybe 8 years old, correctly identifies that there are two currents in the pool, one on the surface going east, one along the bottom going west. When you check with your hand, he's absolutely right. The teaching methods are ingenious in their simplicity. Children learn to associate different water movements with animals. The quick darting of fish for choppy wind waves, the slow glide of a ray for deep swells, the spiral of an octopus for eddy currents. They sing songs where the rhythm matches common wave patterns. They play with flexible sticks that bend like the stick charts, making the connection between physical models and ocean reality. Every game, every story, every casual moment in the water adds another layer to their understanding, building navigators from the inside out through pure experiential learning. The knowledge you're acquiring comes with strings attached, heavy, spiritual strings that bind you to traditions stretching back into the mists of time. Your teacher takes you to a sacred grove where navigators have been initiated for generations. The trees here are said to hold the memories of every voyage, every discovery, every navigator who learned these secrets. She speaks in hushed tones about the protocols and taboos that protect navigation knowledge, and you begin to understand that you're not just learning a skill, you're being inducted into a sacred brotherhood. This knowledge doesn't belong to you, she explains firmly. You're merely its temporary keeper. It flows through you to the next generation, and you must guard it carefully. The secrecy isn't just cultural paranoia. Navigation knowledge is power, the power to find new fishing grounds, to escape enemies, to trade with distant islands. Families guard their specific techniques jealously. Some navigational tricks are passed only from parent to child, never shared with outsiders. You're taught the general principles, but each navigation family has its own secret refinements. The spiritual dimensions run deep. Before major voyages, navigators undergo purification rituals. They abstain from certain foods and activities. They make offerings to the ocean spirits and ask ancestors for guidance. You participate in a ceremony where elder navigators chant the names of every island in the archipelago, calling on them to stand tall and make themselves known to voyagers. It sounds like superstition until you realize these chants also encode practical information, prevailing wind directions, seasonal variations, and hazard warnings embedded in poetic language. The mainstream historical fact is that Polynesian navigation was inseparable from spiritual practice, with religious protocols governing everything from canoe construction to departure times. But here's the intriguing detail: many taboos had practical foundations. The prohibition against navigators eating certain fish before voyages? Those fish are now known to contain mild toxins that can affect inner ear function. The requirement to abstain from sexual activity? It supposedly heightened sensory acuity, though historians still argue whether this was physiological or psychological. Your initiation includes learning the genealogies of navigation, not just the names of master navigators but their specific innovations and discoveries. This navigator first found the wave pattern that leads to a particular island. That one discovered how to use phosphorescent plankton to detect current boundaries at night. Another developed a technique for smelling land. Yes, smelling it from beyond visual range. Each innovation is credited, remembered, and passed down like scientific papers in an oral tradition journal. The secrecy creates interesting challenges. When European explorers first encountered Pacific navigators, they often received deliberately vague or misleading information. Navigators would share general principles but withhold crucial details. They'd demonstrate techniques but perform them slightly wrong. This wasn't malicious, it was protective. The knowledge was sacred, powerful, and not meant for outsiders who hadn't undergone the proper spiritual preparation. You learn there are different levels of initiation. Basic navigation, following known routes between familiar islands, is widely taught. But the deep knowledge, how to find new islands, how to navigate in storms, how to use emergency techniques when everything goes wrong, this is restricted to those who've proven themselves worthy. You're somewhere in the middle, trusted enough to learn serious techniques but not yet privy to the most closely guarded secrets. Your teacher hints at knowledge you're not ready for, ways to navigate by the taste of spray, by the behavior of certain seabirds, by phosphorescent patterns in the water that only appear under specific conditions. Maybe someday, she says when you ask. First, master what you've been given. The vessel that carries you across the vast Pacific is itself a marvel of engineering that amplifies your wave-reading abilities. You're helping to build a traditional double-hulled voyaging canoe, and every measurement, every lashing, every choice of wood has been refined over centuries to create the perfect ocean-sensing instrument. The master shipwright explains that the canoe isn't just transportation, it's a prosthetic extension of the navigator's sensory system, designed to transmit the ocean's messages directly to your body. The two hulls are carefully matched for length and buoyancy, but here's the clever part: they're not rigidly connected. The platform between them uses a flexible lashing system that allows each hull to ride waves independently while still moving as a unit. This design means you feel every nuance of the ocean's movement. When swells come from multiple directions, one hull might rise while the other falls, and that twisting motion tells you exactly what's happening with the wave patterns. It's like having stereo vision, but for ocean swells. You spend days learning the intimate personality of your vessel. Where to stand to best feel the primary swell. Which part of the deck vibrates when reflected waves hit the hull. How the steering paddle transmits different frequencies of water movement up through your arms. The canoe's natural resonance is tuned to amplify certain wave periods while dampening others. It's essentially a mechanical filter that helps separate important navigation signals from surface noise. The mainstream engineering fact is that Polynesian double-hulled canoes could sail faster and point higher into the wind than European ships of similar size. But the weird detail that makes you appreciate ancient innovation: the hulls are deliberately built with slightly different shapes. One is typically a bit fuller in the bow, the other finer. This asymmetry creates a subtle turning tendency that experienced navigators use as a compass. When the canoe tries to turn left, they know they're heading in a particular direction relative to the swells. Historians still argue whether the double-hull design was primarily for stability, speed, or navigation sensing. The answer is probably all three, but the navigation benefits are remarkable. Single-hulled vessels roll with the waves, making it harder to distinguish between different swell patterns. The stable platform of a double hull lets you stand upright for hours, feeling wave patterns through your feet and legs without fighting for balance. Some navigators even string nets between the hulls and lie in them, suspended just above the water, to feel wave patterns without the interference of the vessel's motion. The construction process itself is a lesson in material science. The wood must be light enough to float high but strong enough to flex without breaking. The lashings use no metal, only braided coconut fiber that tightens when wet and has just enough stretch to let the vessel flex without coming apart. You learn to inspect every joint, every rope, every surface, because 1,000 miles from land is no place to discover shoddy workmanship. Your favorite spot becomes the small platform built between the hulls just behind the mast. Here, you can lie down and feel the ocean through the vessel's entire structure. The mast transmits vibrations from the rigging. The deck carries the rhythm of waves hitting the hulls. Even the cargo, water gourds, and food bundles shifts subtly with the swells, adding their own harmonics to the symphony of motion. In rough seas, the sensation is overwhelming, but on calm nights, it's like lying on a giant musical instrument played by the ocean itself. The canoe doesn't fight the sea. It dances with it, and you're learning to feel the rhythm of that dance. Your tongue becomes an unexpected navigation instrument when your teacher shows you how to taste the ocean's subtle messages. She scoops up a handful of seawater and sips it thoughtfully, then has you do the same. At first, it just tastes like, well, seawater. Salty. Unpleasant. But she makes you try again, this time holding it in your mouth longer, letting it wash over your tongue. What else? She asks. And gradually, you begin to detect it, A faint metallic tang that wasn't there yesterday. Storm coming, she announces. 2 days, maybe 3. She explains that storms change the ocean's chemistry in subtle ways. The churning waves bring up different minerals from the deep. The rain dilutes surface salinity. The increased biological activity from nutrients being mixed changes the water's taste. Master navigators can detect these changes days before the weather shifts, giving them time to adjust course or find shelter. You learn to sample water at different times of day, from different depths, from different parts of the vessel's wake. Morning water tastes different from evening water. Water from the lee side of the canoe carries different information than water from the windward side. Sometimes you detect the sweetness that means you're approaching a river mouth, even when you're still far from land. Other times, there's a particular flatness that indicates you're in the shadow of an atoll where the enclosed lagoon water is mixing with ocean water. The mainstream scientific fact is that the human tongue can detect salinity differences of less than 1 part per thousand. We're surprisingly sensitive to salt concentration changes. But here's the bizarre technique that sounds made up but isn't. Some navigators could detect underwater freshwater springs by taste. On certain limestone islands, freshwater percolates through the rock and bubbles up through the reef, creating plumes of less salty water. If you know where these springs are, they become navigation markers, invisible beacons you can taste but not see. Historians still argue whether reports of navigators predicting weather by tasting spray are exaggerated. Yet modern oceanographers have confirmed that storm systems do create detectable chemical signatures in seawater. The question isn't whether these changes exist, but whether human senses are refined enough to detect them reliably. Your own experience suggests they are. After weeks of practice, you can definitely taste differences that you couldn't perceive before. The spray itself carries information beyond just taste. When waves break, they create aerosols, tiny droplets that hang in the air. The size and density of these droplets change based on wave conditions, wind speed, and water temperature. You learn to read the quality of spray hitting your face. Fine mist means one thing, heavy droplets another. The way spray stings your eyes tells you about wind direction and strength. Even the sound of spray hitting the sail provides navigation clues. Your most surreal lesson comes during a rain squall when your teacher has you stand on deck with your mouth open, tasting the rain mixing with ocean spray. This rain fell on mountains 2 days ago, she says, and you realize she's tracking the storm's path by the taste of the water it carries. It seems impossible, but then she correctly predicts that you'll sight a particular island chain by evening, islands that lie in the direction the storm came from. Whether she's reading some subtle chemical signature or combining taste with other observations, the result is uncanny. You're learning that navigation isn't just about one sense or technique, it's about weaving together every possible source of information into a coherent picture of where you are and where you're going. The sky above you suddenly fills with wings as a flock of white terns wheels overhead, their cries piercing the dawn air. Your teacher grabs your shoulder and points excitedly. "Those are our guides," she says. "They're heading home." You watch the birds disappear toward the horizon and adjust your course to follow. These aren't random seabirds, they're commuters with a predictable schedule, and you're about to learn how to read their daily patterns like a navigation manual written in feathers and flight. Different birds mean different things. Boobies and frigate birds can range far from land, sometimes hundreds of miles, so seeing them doesn't necessarily mean you're close to an island. But terns, nadas, and certain types of petrels rarely venture more than 20 miles from their nesting grounds. When you see them heading purposefully in one direction at dawn, they're going fishing. When they return in the evening, they're heading home to their island. It's a twice-daily compass pointing directly at land, assuming you can tell which direction is which. You learn to read the subtle differences in bird behavior. Birds flying straight and high are usually traveling between distant points. Birds circling and diving are feeding, which might mean nothing or might indicate an upwelling where deep currents hit an underwater mountain. Birds flying low and scanning the water are hunting, but birds flying low and fast in a straight line are often following a current line that leads to land. Even their calls change. The excited chatter of birds approaching their nesting grounds sounds different from the lonely cries of birds over open ocean. The mainstream biological fact is that many seabirds have an uncanny ability to navigate back to tiny islands across vast distances, probably using a combination of magnetic fields, sun position, and landmarks. But here's the clever observation your ancestors made. Certain birds prefer to nest on particular sides of islands. Sooty terns like windward cliffs. Red-footed boobies prefer leeward shores. So not only do the birds tell you where land is, they give you hints about which side of the island you're approaching. Historians still argue whether navigators could really predict weather by watching bird behavior, but your teacher demonstrates it convincingly. She points out how the frigate birds are flying unusually high today, riding thermals that shouldn't exist over cool ocean water. Storm coming, she predicts, and sure enough, by evening you're battening down for a squall. Birds feel barometric pressure changes and adjust their behavior accordingly. They're living weather stations if you know how to read them. Cloud reading becomes another crucial skill. Islands create their own weather, and these atmospheric signatures are visible from far beyond the range where you can see the land itself. Low atolls create subtle cloud formations, just a slight thickening of the cumulus layer where warm air rises from the sun-heated lagoon. High volcanic islands generate more dramatic effects. Cap clouds that sit like hats on invisible peaks, or lens-shaped clouds that form in the lee of mountains you can't yet see. But the most magical navigation aid is the pale green reflection on the underside of clouds. Lagoons and shallow reefs reflect greenish light upward, tinting the clouds above them. On overcast days when you can't use stars or sun, these green-tinted clouds become beacons pointing to land. Your teacher calls it the navigator's lantern, and teaches you to scan the horizon for that telltale green glow. Sometimes you even see the patterns of individual reefs reflected on the cloud base, a ghostly map of islands still beyond the horizon, painted on the sky in subtle shades of blue and green. The arrival of European ships brings a different kind of wave to Pacific waters, a cultural tsunami that threatens to wash away 3,000 years of navigation knowledge in a single generation. You're now in the late 1700s, watching from shore as strange vessels with rigid sails and copper-bottomed hulls anchor in your lagoon. The pale men aboard carry mysterious instruments, sextants, chronometers, compasses, and they seem baffled that your people navigate without them. They offer to teach you the proper way to find your position using angles and mathematics. Your grandfather, one of the last great navigators, watches with sad eyes as young people flock to learn these new methods. Why feel the ocean's heartbeat, they ask, when this magnetic needle always points north? Why memorize 200 star positions when this brass instrument can tell you exactly where you are? The European tools are seductive in their simplicity. No years of patient training required. No spiritual preparation. No need to develop intimate relationships with wind and wave. Just look at the dial and follow the needle. Within a single generation, the knowledge begins to fade. Navigation schools empty as students choose European education. The stick charts gather dust in dark corners of meeting houses. Sacred chants are forgotten as hymns replace them. Your grandfather tries to pass on his knowledge, but his own sons show little interest. They're too busy working on European trading ships, earning metal tools and cloth. The ocean highways that connected the Pacific Islands for millennia start to empty of traditional voyaging canoes. The mainstream historical tragedy is that European colonization disrupted indigenous navigation within decades of contact. By the early 1900s, traditional voyaging had virtually ceased across most of the Pacific. But here's the heartbreaking detail. Many European explorers genuinely admired Polynesian navigation and tried to document it, but they fundamentally misunderstood what they were seeing. They kept asking for maps and charts, not grasping that the knowledge lived in bodies and minds, not on paper. They recorded fragments, a list of star names here, A sketch of a stick chart there, but missed the integrated whole. Historians still argue whether the loss was inevitable or if traditional navigation could have coexisted with European methods. Some islands managed to preserve fragments of the knowledge, often in secret. Navigators would publicly use compasses while privately still reading waves. They'd carry sextants but navigate by stars. But the spiritual framework that supported navigation, the ceremonies, the genealogies, the sacred relationships with the ocean, these couldn't survive in hiding. They needed community support, regular practice, and intergenerational transmission. The saddest part is watching the last navigators age without students. Your grandfather takes you on one final voyage, just the two of you in a small canoe. His hands shake now, but when he lies in the hull to feel the swells, decades of muscle memory take over. He guides you unerringly to a distant atoll, navigating by techniques he can no longer fully explain because the words themselves are being forgotten. Remember this, he whispers urgently. Remember how it feels. Someday, someone will want to know again. The European ships bring disease, Christianity, and colonial administration. Traditional voyaging is discouraged or outright banned as dangerous and primitive. Children are punished for speaking native languages where navigation terms are embedded. The ocean, once a highway, becomes a barrier. Islands that were connected nodes in a vast network become isolated dots, dependent on European shipping schedules. The navigators' sons become plantation workers or sailors on foreign vessels, using their sea sense to enrich others while their own traditions slip away like water through fingers. The Renaissance begins with a single man lying in the bottom of a canoe, trying to remember. It's 1975, and Nainoa Thompson, a young Hawaiian with no traditional navigation training, is attempting to recreate what his ancestors knew instinctively. He's part of the Polynesian Voyaging Society's audacious plan to sail a reconstructed double-hulled canoe from Hawaii to Tahiti using only traditional navigation methods. The problem? Almost no one alive remembers how to do it. The knowledge that was once as common as riding a bicycle has become as rare as ancient Sanskrit. Thompson seeks out Mau Pielug, one of the last master navigators from Micronesia, and convinces him to break tradition and teach a non-Micronesian the sacred knowledge. Mau agrees, seeing it as the only way to prevent the complete extinction of Pacific navigation. On a beach in Hawaii, the old master and young student recreate the ancient teaching methods. Thompson lies in tide pools feeling currents. He memorizes star positions until he dreams in constellations. He learns to feel the intersection of swells through the deck of the canoe hkli. The first voyage is equal parts triumph and terror. Thompson successfully navigates to Tahiti without instruments, proving that ancient Polynesians could have deliberately colonized the Pacific rather than drifting accidentally as some European scholars claimed. But he also discovers how much knowledge has been lost. Techniques that should have been passed down through generations have to be painfully reconstructed through trial and error. He's not just navigating, he's reverse engineering an entire knowledge system from fragments and principles. The mainstream historical fact is that the Hkli's successful voyage sparked a cultural revolution across the Pacific. Suddenly, traditional navigation wasn't primitive, it was sophisticated, even superior to Western methods in some ways. Young people who had been taught to be ashamed of their backward culture began to take pride in their ancestors' achievements. But here's the unexpected consequence. The revival had to be hybrid. Thompson used traditional techniques but verified them with modern instruments during training. He learned from Micronesian methods to fill gaps in Hawaiian knowledge. The revived tradition was both authentic and synthetic. Historians still argue whether modern traditional navigation is the same as ancient practice or something new. Certainly, the context has changed dramatically. Ancient navigators were traveling for survival, to find new homes, to trade, to fish. Modern navigators often voyage for cultural reasons, to prove a point, to reconnect with heritage, to teach the next generation. The spiritual framework has been partially reconstructed but lacks the unconscious certainty of unbroken tradition. Modern navigators know how to read waves, but do they read them the same way their ancestors did? The revival spreads across the Pacific like ripples from a thrown stone. New Zealand Maori reconstruct their voyaging traditions. Tahitians build their own voyaging canoes. Even in places where the knowledge seemed completely lost, elders come forward with fragments. A remembered chant here, a half-forgotten technique there. The stick charts come out of storage. Young people learn to lie in canoes and feel swells. Navigation schools reopen, teaching both traditional techniques and modern safety procedures. Thompson and his students make dozens of voyages, each one recovering a bit more knowledge. They discover that traditional navigation still works. In some conditions, it works better than GPS. When electronic instruments fail, the navigator who can read waves and stars keeps going. When satellites malfunction, the person who can taste storms coming stays safe. The old knowledge isn't obsolete. It's robust in ways that high-tech solutions aren't. You can't break a star. You can't run out of batteries for reading swells. The ocean itself becomes your instrument, and it's always on. Modern science catches up to ancient wisdom in the oceanography labs of universities worldwide, where researchers point sophisticated instruments at the same wave patterns navigators have been reading with their bodies for millennia. Satellite altimeters measure sea surface height with millimeter precision, revealing the exact interference patterns that create navigation signatures around islands. Computer models simulate how swells bend and reflect, generating images that look remarkably like traditional stick charts. The vindication is complete. Those primitive navigators were reading real, measurable phenomena with accuracy that rivals modern technology. You're in a university lecture hall where a physicist explains wave diffraction using equations that fill 3 blackboards. But when she shows the computer simulation of swells bending around an island, an elderly Pacific Islander in the audience chuckles. "My grandmother drew that pattern in the sand when I was 5, he says. She called it the island skirt." The physicist is intrigued and spends the next hour learning how traditional navigators understood complex wave physics through metaphor and embodied knowledge rather than mathematics. Research vessels equipped with sensitive accelerometers follow traditional navigators, measuring the exact wave patterns they claim to feel. The data is astounding. Experienced navigators consistently detect swells with amplitudes of less than 5 centimeters in confused seas where multiple wave systems interact. They identify the dominant swell direction within 2 degrees of what the instruments show. They predict the distance to unseen islands with accuracy that makes the scientists double-check their GPS units. The mainstream scientific validation goes beyond just confirming that wave patterns exist. Researchers discover that traditional navigation techniques often work better than modern instruments in specific conditions. GPS can tell you where you are but not whether you're drifting off course in a current. Satellite weather data shows large-scale patterns but misses the local variations that navigators read in spray patterns and bird behavior. The human body, it turns out, is a remarkably sophisticated sensor when properly trained. But here's the humbling discovery. Science can explain how traditional navigation works but struggles to replicate it. Knowing the physics of wave diffraction doesn't automatically give you the ability to feel it through a canoe hull. Understanding the theory of phosphorescent plankton distribution doesn't mean you can use it to detect currents on a moonless night. The embodied knowledge, the years of physical training, the intuitive pattern recognition, the holistic integration of multiple sensory inputs, this remains beyond what any instrument can fully capture. Historians still argue whether validating traditional knowledge through Western science legitimizes or diminishes it. Does indigenous knowledge need scientific approval to be considered valid? The navigators themselves seem amused by the debate. They've always known their techniques worked. They wouldn't have survived thousands of years of ocean voyaging otherwise. The scientific confirmation is nice but unnecessary. What matters is that the knowledge continues to be practiced and passed on. Modern navigators carry GPS units as backup but often leave them turned off. They use weather satellites to see large storm systems but trust their own senses for local conditions. They appreciate the safety net of modern technology while maintaining the skills that work when technology fails. And fail it does. Batteries die, satellites malfunction, screens crack in salt spray. But the stars keep rising, the swells keep running, and navigators who can read them keep finding their way home. The research continues, with each study revealing new layers of sophistication in traditional techniques. Scientists discover that navigators can detect internal waves, slow-moving disturbances that propagate below the surface. They find that the phosphorescent patterns navigators use actually indicate specific types of plankton associated with different water masses. Every investigation seems to confirm what Pacific Islanders have been saying all along. The ocean is full of information if you know how to read it. You drift now in the vast Pacific darkness, your journey through the history of wave navigation coming full circle as you lie in your canoe feeling the ocean's pulse one last time. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal patterns, Arcturus setting in the west, the Southern Cross hanging low on the horizon, the Pleiades rising like diamonds scattered across velvet. Below you, the deep swells roll in their ancient rhythms, carrying messages from storms 1,000 miles away, whispering of islands beyond tomorrow's horizon. The knowledge flows through you like the water itself, 3,000 years of accumulated wisdom distilled into this moment of perfect understanding. You feel the primary swell from the northeast, steady as a heartbeat. You sense the secondary swell from the south, weaker but persistent. And there, so faint you might be imagining it, the confused water that speaks of land to the west. Your body has become the instrument, your senses the technology, your mind the computer processing countless subtle inputs into a single, clear understanding. You know where you are. Modern GPS might place you at specific coordinates, but your knowledge is richer, deeper, more alive. You know not just where you are but where you've been and where you're going. You feel the current that's been pushing you slightly north all day. You taste the rain that will arrive before dawn. You see in the stars not just direction but season, not just bearing but timing. The phosphorescent plankton glowing in your wake tells you about the water mass you're traveling through. The frigate bird that passed overhead at sunset, flying purposefully southwest, confirms what the swells have been suggesting: land lies in that direction, probably 2 days' sail if the wind holds. The mainstream triumph of this story is that ancient knowledge has survived against all odds, passed through the bottleneck of near extinction to flourish again in the modern world. But the deeper victory is the proof that human beings can develop profound, sophisticated relationships with the natural world without industrial technology. Your ancestors weren't primitive, they were differently advanced. Their intelligence focused on reading the environment rather than controlling it. Historians still argue whether we can ever truly recover what was lost during those dark decades when the knowledge almost died. The answer lies here in the darkness with you, feeling the ocean breathe. No, we can't recover exactly what was lost. The unbroken chain of transmission, the absolute certainty of inherited wisdom, the seamless integration with spiritual practice. But we've recovered something perhaps more precious. The proof that such knowledge is possible, that humans can navigate by subtle senses, that the ocean itself can be our map and compass. The canoe rises and falls gently, and you realize you're no longer consciously analyzing the swells. Your body knows them, responds to them, reads them automatically. This is the final lesson. True navigation isn't about technique but about relationship. The ocean isn't a hostile wilderness to be conquered but a partner to dance with. The waves aren't obstacles but messengers. The vast distances aren't empty but full of information for those who know how to perceive it. As you sail through the star-filled darkness toward tomorrow's landfall, you carry with you the knowledge of all those who came before, the first voyagers who set out from Southeast Asia, the master navigators who found every inhabitable speck in the vast Pacific, the last traditional wayfinders who kept the knowledge alive, and the modern revivalists who brought it back from the brink. You are part of an unbroken chain of humans who looked at the trackless ocean and saw highways, who felt the planet's pulse through wooden hulls and their own skin, who proved that we need not be lost as long as we remember how to feel our way home. The stars fade slowly as dawn approaches, painting the eastern sky in shades of pearl and rose. Your night voyage is ending, but the journey continues with each swell that passes beneath your hull, each star that wheels overhead, each navigator who learns to read the ocean's ancient language. You've traveled through time tonight, from the first Pacific crossings to the modern revival, discovering that the deepest human knowledge isn't stored in books or computers but in the relationship between sensing bodies and the living world. The waves continue their eternal conversation, and somewhere, a young person is lying in a tide pool for the first time, feeling the water's movement, beginning their own journey into this profound tradition. The knowledge flows on like the ocean itself, sometimes underground, sometimes breaking into the light, but always moving, always finding new channels, always seeking those ready to receive its gifts. Sleep comes gently now, rocked by the same swells that have carried navigators for thousands of years. Your body knows where you are. The ocean knows where you're going. And in that knowing, passed from hand to hand and heart to heart across the generations, lies one of humanity's greatest achievements, the transformation of an endless, trackless wilderness into a home, readable as the lines on your own palm, welcoming as your mother's voice calling you back from far away. The canoe sails on through the tropical night, guided by stars and swells and the accumulated wisdom of centuries. You are never lost. The ocean itself is your map. The waves themselves will guide you home. Close your eyes now and rest, cradled in the vast Pacific's embrace, knowing that when you wake, the island you seek will be there on the horizon, exactly where the swells promised it would be.